I have only ever referred, I think, 4 people to the police. But it was just like that's gone over the top.
Well, you had death threats, didn't you? Particularly
Exactly.
around the XL bully legislation.
Yeah. And I'm not, that is still under investigation. So I can't really say too much about that. It was a credible. I felt sufficiently concerned that somebody wanted to do me harm, that I did refer it. But as I say, you can't let these things stop you doing stuff. But you just have to be constantly careful. And I'm a witness to 2 MPs having been murdered, but very early on becoming an MP. It was a current serving MP, Stephen Timms, who was stabbed in his surgery. And I've always been mindful of that. And at times I've been criticised perhaps for lack of accessibility, but that's just the approach I've taken.
And Therese Coffey joins us now. Hello.
Hello, Kate.
Lovely to have you with us. Now, you were elected in 2010. That was obviously a huge turning point in politics in this country. What was the mood like then, and how does it compare to the mood in Parliament now?
Well, certainly for the Conservatives, having not been in power for 13 years, it was joyous, even if slightly qualified by the fact that we didn't win an overall majority at that time. But it recognised that a huge mountain had been climbed. I think during those early days, if I think back on the formation of the coalition, I haven't read that many books about it, but I do recall there was one pivotal moment, and it may well become relevant in an election this year as well. And it was connected while we were in Parliament on the Liberal Democrats were all being very organised, meeting every day, all the rest of it. And we had 2 particular meetings, and more or less we were informed that if we didn't go with the Liberal Democrats would actually go with Labour because they were going to offer them a PR or AV voting system without a referendum. And I think there was sufficient concern that such a constitutional change being on the back of that, when actually a lot of work had been done in a short amount of time to see where there was actually a lot of agreement between the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats. And it led to a coalition government, which by and large worked. I'm conscious that I only joined government as a whip in 2014 in that final year, and that's where it started to somewhat get a bit more strained between the 2 parties in the government. But of course, David Cameron then took us on to 2015. But thinking back, I think it was 147 new Conservative MPs joined that day in May. And in one way, we were so big that we actually didn't form a gel quite so well. But also it was very significant at the same time, the change of some of the House of Commons rules, instead of the whips having the power on who went on which committee, all these reforms came in at the same time. So it really felt like a new beginning after the expenses scandal, a new government, a new way of doing things in Westminster. And I think, a lot of us threw ourselves into that new kind of era.
And how does it feel now?
Well, now it feels, I guess I've been, in my time if I think, in early 2024, I've been an MP for longer, as it were, after the referendum compared to before. And, that in itself has changed politics quite significantly. I guess I had been a minister for continuously from July 2014 through to November 23. So again, a different perspective. And undoubtedly, with the election coming up this year, polls as they are, people are, on my party, obviously concerned. But I think on a broader thing, there's still a core of people who absolutely, in the majority of the party, want to pull together and to do the best we can and try and win the next election. But I tell you the other thing that's changed massively, we now have something like Times Radio. We now have something like Talk TV. There just weren't that number of media outlets in the past. And I think the other thing that's dramatically changed how politics operates is social media. So whether it's the short clips in Parliament, whether it's the piling in on commentary and a lot of people jumping to conclusions. We've seen how clips can be suddenly changed a way something is clipped can really change the what happened in a situation. And I have to say, the whole aspect of AI and fake voices and distorting, and how you judge truth from kind of falsehood is going to be absolutely, I think, at the core of this election this year, not only in this country, but of course in the United States as well.
Yeah. I want to come back to talk about social media with you, but on that point about AI, it's a really interesting one because we've seen AI used. There was an example in the conference period of Keir Starmer, and a fake Keir Starmer, supposedly shouting at an aide or getting frustrated with an aide, and it was really quickly, ignored but sort of denounced by your party and the Labour Party. Do you think in this country we've got enough of an eye on that with the election coming up? Do you think we've done enough work to recognise it, to try and mitigate against it?
Well, I think some of this is where the credibility issue comes in. And I think anybody who knows Keir Starmer knows they probably really wouldn't talk to their aides like that. And I think it helped that our party, our government, stepped in as well, because we want to try and get away from this sort of 5-second clip. Is it true or false? Or people assuming X, Y, Z. And of course, both sides or all parties have to earn respect in that regard. But it is concerning. It was raised in cabinet discussions that we had about the huge opportunity of AI, but also the risks. And that's why the Prime Minister set about having that global AI summit. But it is, I guess, concerning. And there's even another one today, but dare I say it, the clip of the Prime Minister on how another news outlet initially clipped it versus there. Yeah. Again, you saw almost people just kind of bundle in and just assume the worst, assume the negatives, and quite often that is part of the challenge of dealing with aspects of social media, trying to distinguish a difference between opinion, but also kind of what really happened.
Does it bother you when things get clipped up and sort of they fly, as it were, on the internet? I mean, that's happened to you a couple of times recently. Does it bother you? Yeah,
it does, and it concerns me when particularly news outlets don't actually even contact you, and then they're already putting stuff out there. So I haven't got a problem where somebody will contact you and say, "Oh, seen this, blah, blah, blah," and then you can either say, "Yeah, load of nonsense," or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate, of course, politics is often, of course, it's about principles and about substance, but it's also undoubtedly about opinions. And it's difficult to sometimes counter some of the elements that are there, especially when it's against the backbencher. I mean, ministers and shadow front bench people often have the party machine behind them. But it is what it is, but it's not very pleasant. And that's why I'm quite keen to push back pretty quickly and reply to say X, Y, Z or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think I've read that you said somewhere that you received more abuse, and I assume you mean online abuse, in your role in the Department for Health than you did, I think, in 3 weeks in that department than you did during your entire time in the Department for Work and Pensions.
I was certainly briefed against more in 3 weeks than I was in 3 years. And yeah, there was a lot of commentary about, as I remember saying to Liz at the time, I'm not the advert for health, for good health. But in some ways, as I turned it into a bit with officials and it's just like something's happened in my life. I've not been able to maintain good level of weight, given up on it. So what's gone wrong as well? And when we know that some of these issues are there. So always try and make a positive of it, but it's not very pleasant. But that's one of the main reasons I don't particularly look at social media now and use it more as a broadcast, apart from my Facebook, where I really try and focus on local issues.
Constituents, yeah. When you say briefed against, do you mean by people in the government or in the department, or do you mean...
In the department, without question, yeah. I've got substantial evidence of a couple of people from the NHS, official within the department who'd moved from had been at DEFRA before and had because of some of the priorities that we were leaning in on, we weren't necessarily pursuing certain food policies, for example. And I've got evidence about an official contacting a variety of retailers and manufacturers, asking them to collectively sign a letter to me. And this is one of my own civil servants. So it was quite extraordinary, I have to say. And it's because of some of the things I've been prepared to stand up a bit for freedom in the past and, challenging a few elements there. But ultimately, what I hope was clear, even in my short time in health, was about the plan for patients and ABCD and getting down to everyday basics, really trying to, as well as some of the long-term work. But like a lot of government, you have to... There's often been a lot of strategies, plans along the way, and at times, and what I think we did well in DWP, as well as trying to look at new ways of how to do things on health, actually stuff on housing benefit and elements like that. On health, we had to go back to why is it taking so long for ambulances to drop off patients? Why don't people seem to be able to get a GP's appointment? And so on. And it's just, we all have different approaches to government, but you have to don a bit of a tin hat every now and again, but sometimes it can be particularly upsetting. And at times, and I've had some threats about, aspects of personal safety. I don't think I've really ever been in a situation where I thought I'd be ultimately at peril, but you're never sure. And that's why some of the people who email or other ways of doing it, I have only ever referred, I think, 4 people to the police. But it was just like, that's gone over the top.
Well, you had death threats, didn't you? Particularly
Exactly.
around the XL bully legislation.
Yeah. And I'm not, that is still under investigation. So I can't really say too much about that. It was a credible... I felt sufficiently concerned that somebody wanted to do me harm, that I did refer it. But as I say, you can't let these things stop you doing stuff, but you just have to be constantly careful. And, I'm a witness to 2 MPs having been murdered, but very early on becoming an MP. It was a current serving MP, Stephen Timms, who was stabbed in his surgery. And I've always been mindful of that. And at times I've been criticised perhaps for lack of accessibility but that's just the approach I've taken.
To protect yourself?
Yeah, so still out and about with there, but not always advertising specifically where I'm going to be or that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm single, I don't have a family, so there, many of my other colleagues are worried about their families at homes and some of the significant security that's now going to people's homes. I just have to think about myself, to be honest, and I'm best to do that by not overly advertising where every step of my movements.
Does it not ever make you think twice about continuing as an MP?
Being a member of Parliament, being elected by your constituents is a massive privilege, and gives you the opportunity to try and help shape the country as well as the local area in a better way, or how you hope it to be. And you do that by legislation, you do that by policy, you do that by being a minister of actually trying to get stuff done in a better way than you think, potentially not necessarily your predecessor, but you want to be as effective as you can be for possible in making their lives and lives a better place to be and livelihoods to be more prosperous. And for me, also in the jobs I've done, thinking about vulnerable, but also in DEFRA, thinking about, of course, the environment. And nature doesn't have a voice. It needs people to be that voice for them.
You mentioned there that, some of the language that you've used or some of the things that you've been willing to say on issues like freedom, and there are lots of others, in your time in Parliament have made you a bit of a target. Do you think that politicians have lost the bravery a little bit, or maybe lost their way when it comes to saying what they think, being able to stand for an issue and back that up with an argument?
Well, I think like any professional or any walk of life, you've got to be also prepared to, if you just speak about anything and everything, one, you lose value in what's saying and you just become a bit of a rent-a-quote. But there's an element of pick your battles. So there may be some things I really care about. And I've done some stuff in the past on trying to stop the change in the law to assisted suicide very successfully in 2015. But that doesn't mean I don't disrespect the people who have that view. But it can become an issue on some other things connected with abortion and some of the ethical issues, but also just more generally freedom on other matters. And it's getting that balance right between promoting freedom but also promoting respect. And I think that's got to be critical for the discourse of how we run our lives, but also the discourse of politics. And too often it becomes literally yaboo. And although at times it can get very frustrating in that chamber, but it is a cauldron at times. But that's, in a way, it should be without being disrespectful.
Yeah. Have your views changed on assisted suicide? I know that some people find that very offensive.
Dying.
Some people call it assisted dying. Have your views changed on that at all?
No.
You would remain, you would still seek to block it if it came
Absolutely.
to Parliament. I want to ask you mentioned the environment. Some people might be surprised to hear that you really genuinely do care about the environment, because a lot of people think that you don't, and they think that because they feel, for whatever reason, that not enough was done by this government to stop sewage, to stop water pollution, to stop all the things that we talk a lot about now. How do you feel about that?
Well, I do care, and I was a minister in the department for 3 years previously, with also aspects of what was a part of the portfolio called rural life opportunities. And I massively care. What I think is fair to say is that I am not going to be an advocate of things like species reintroduction and some other elements like that. I care about habitat. And if I think of, in my own constituency in Suffolk, National Trust has a lot of land there. And Dunwich Heath, I think something like 60% of the heath has gone due to nature. But coming back to some of the other issues, and I think, again, there's been a bit of an issue here, water, sewage. It's why I worked hard to create a plan for water, which we published last April. And I guess part of the challenge for me is that actually a lot of progress has been made on issues like sewage and similar. And perhaps we shouldn't have unveiled the problem a decade ago or asked water companies to monitor, but actually, of course we should. But what it's shown is that there have been issues where actually it's been legitimate in terms of storm overflow sewage releases. Otherwise, this sewage would back up into people's homes. But also, we need to recognise this is a big transformation. And at the same time, perhaps we haven't explained it enough, but you'll know the phrase, if you have to start explaining, then you've already lost the argument. But there is an element of aspects of trying to, dare I say, educate, inform, but at the moment, there's no doubt that water is getting better, but not as quickly as it should be. And too much has been let slip over a long time. And it's only got the prominence recently, really, that it has because of the extra information that we've unveiled. And but it's been I think Plan for Water can be successful. It's obviously in other people's hands now to pursue the different approaches. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of personal abuse about that. People would shout at me in the street about it. And that wasn't a very pleasant time. But that certainly has gone away, I would say, since not being in government anymore.
Just to explain to me, because one of the things, I think a lot of people understand the idea that because of the way the sewage system is built in this country, if you don't allow overflow during heavy rainfall with storms, it will back up into people's homes. I think what people find very difficult to understand is when you're seeing these sewage releases into rivers, particularly things like chalk streams, which we know are very protected, in times when there isn't heavy rain or a storm. Why is that happening, and why are water companies allowed to do it every day? Well,
part of the coming back to what you've said, some of it is technical, as in it might take a bit of time to flow through. But I agree. I think the priorities, and this is what I wanted to see in terms of an action plan for every storm overflow, is what was being done to fix them, to address them. But also, one of the other perhaps slightly more frustrating elements is that the Environment Agency, which has the regulatory powers, and actually the water companies, every single one of them, is still under a criminal investigation. And the government can't interfere in that criminal investigation, which the Environment Agency is doing.
How long has that been going on for?
It's been going on, I'd think, about 18 months. And I have to say, as a minister, it's as frustrating for me about the progress of that. But again, I'm not in a position when it comes to regulators on telling them what to do or how to do it in that regard, where sometimes, and I think this is one of the greater challenges of the DEFRA family, sometimes the bodies like Natural England or Environment Agency are the regulator, but a large part of the work they do, we ask them to do on our behalf. And that's where quite often, including in my own constituency, people say, well, you run the Environment Agency. Well, actually, strictly speaking, on certain things, I don't.
Which, is it? Are they just a bit pointless now?
No, not at all. But it's a bit like, Ofwat asked for more powers to deal with water companies. They got that in the Environment Act and subsequent regulations. So the powers are there. There's a very clear steer to really pursue where people are not doing it. But there's also recognition. Things like we're very near the Thames here. That Thames Tideway, the super sewer, it will be ready sometime this year. I'm hoping in the next few months. But that's taken about 10 years to build.
Yeah, it's a huge operation.
It's huge, and there are going to be similar projects that may well be needed around the country as well. Yeah. So some of these should be fixed a lot more quickly than I believe the water company should have been doing it. But it all ends up, dare I say it, on your desk, on my desk, and that's just one of the roles of aspects of government in different elements. Yeah. But I can assure you, great to get the environmental improvement plan out there. Walking into a department that I was told, you'll break the law on Monday because we haven't done this.
What was it that you hadn't done?
Oh, we hadn't set the targets and legislated for the targets for the linking to the Environment Act. And
why hadn't that been done?
Well, it's a very good question. Never really got to the bottom of that within DEFRA.
Do you think it's because people sometimes don't really care that much about DEFRA?
Well, for what it's worth, I think there've been a couple of changes of ministers, but even then, I was surprised that things had not happened or been done. And my initial thing that I was told is that we wouldn't be able to get all the legislation and stuff done until May. Anyway, we laid the regulations before Christmas. So it really was a lot of drive of trying to get the department to recognise that these things, when we say we're going to do it, we really have to prioritise them. And of course, this is why many NGOs, many MPs, peers want this X, Y and Z to be in legislation, because then it feels there's more of an obligation, but it shouldn't require legislation to want to improve the environment.
Yeah.
And I think, if I think back over a decade, something there the size of Dorset has now got extra kind of habitat there, and there's a clear path to do that. But it ain't going to be for reintroducing things like links or some other things. Of course, there have been some successful reintroductions, but the real focus, the real science is making sure we have the habitat, and that will allow nature to thrive. And that's why things like the biodiversity net gain regulations, again, we were held up by another department, hadn't got their act together. Although we didn't break the law, our pledge was not met, but it's now happening. And it's just that delay that adds to a frustration when actually it's inspirational looking at nature in its finest. And it's flora and fauna. And that's something on a domestic level, but also internationally, that I am really proud of what we drove right across the world. Yeah. So it is very inspirational to me. There's interesting conflicts. It feels at times it shouldn't be a conflict. It should be symbiotic between farming and environment. But it can lead to rather extreme accusations, as it were, of why on earth are we doing this? People care a lot
about it, don't they?
They care, exactly.
I mean, just finally,
animal welfare in particular, people really care, and I respect that.
Just finally on the sewage point, Labour are, making their big play on sewage and saying that they are going to fine water companies for illegal discharging. They're going to give the power to remove bonuses. They think there's a lot more to be done on the financial side with the water companies, and particularly with named people in the water companies, some of these bosses. Why did you not choose to do more on that front?
Well, the powers have been given to Ofwat to deploy.
Do they have exactly those powers already?
So I don't know if the minutiae of some of the Labour proposals, and it may be they pursue other routes. They may decide that they want to do stuff. Quite often it's easy to say things in opposition, and then when you get in, I get the impression that it's not quite so straightforward to put stuff into law. But clearly there are issues there, and fines are being deployed as far as I'm aware. But it is. We've also made it easier in terms of certain aspects needed the Environment Agency to pay people to court. We've made it more straightforward for penalties and unlimited penalties to be deployed, so it's those sorts of things that we're now giving those powers into the hands of our regulators to act rather than the government directly undertake that.
But they're not acting, are they? I mean, that's the problem. Waterboss has made £26 million in, I think, 3 years, over the last 4 years, in bonuses and incentives. I mean, that's, given the state of the water system in this country, that doesn't seem right to lots of people.
Well, Kate, the state of the water system is that we actually have the cleanest drinking water in the world.
The sewage
We're in the top
outlets,
5.
the discharges, the fact that water companies on a regular basis end up with situations where vast swathes of the country don't have water. You know, there are areas of Guildford, Surrey, London, particularly Kent, where, you know, water goes off on a regular basis now.
I wouldn't say it's a regular basis. It's a lot less than it used to be, but I'm conscious of some of the elements that have happened, particularly linked to a freeze-thaw situation, and happened again not that long ago. However, I think it's about taking the right approach on how you get the right incentives for water companies to do that. That's why the criminal investigation is underway. It's why the penalties are now able to be applied in a much more straightforward way than happened before. So some of this, came through with the Environment Act. Last time I was in the department, we hardly had any data, so it didn't have the same traction that it does now. But I think it's important that we continue to keep that focus, of course, and it's a monopoly. And I used to remind the water companies of that. They have an obligation. It's not like people can go elsewhere. But ultimately, I'm looking forward to the outcomes of the criminal investigations, and I genuinely wish it was happening at a quicker pace. But that is still in the hands of the regulator.
Did you ever think it might be a wise move to nationalise the water companies?
No, there's just there's no way you could do the capital investment. If I think in just the next handful of years, how many billions of pounds are going to be spent by the water companies on these sorts of elements.
And by all of us, because we'll be subsidising it.
Yeah. The other alternative would be that we wouldn't have these changes, or we'd have less capital going into defence or water or NHS, or all those other matters. So, this has been established for a long time, and there has been investment, there have been improvements, but clearly there's still more to do.
I want to move on, but just before I do you have any... You've spoken about what you're really proud of in the department, particularly about habitats. What is there anything that you regret during your time there?
Well, I wish... I'm not going to say it's about communications. I wish we had accelerated some of the actions from our plan for water. I think, the departments are really different. I think some of the things that I did was to try and get more people working on the whole water situation. But you've got to work within the machinery of a department in doing that. There's other bits that come along and that happen, and that's just the way stuff is. So, I think I left the department in a better state than when I went in. But clearly, there's still considerable passion about these different sorts of issues. Things came along, like the situation up in the northeast, and all of a sudden that consumes a lot of scientific resource. Other things happen. Meanwhile, at the same time, we're trying to get these international agreements on nature, which we did amazingly, brilliantly on, and still be deploying and trying to get other stuff working, where nature and oceans coming together. So a lot of work goes into that as well.
You have now left government.
Yes.
How's it feel being on the backbenches?
Well, I have to say, Kate, in my first 2 weeks, I did 8 speeches, and not just interventions or questions. I did 8 speeches in the Chamber and Westminster Hall. I think it was after so long of not being able to say or comment really on anything else.
Because you
apart from
can't,
what I
as
was
a minister,
responsible.
you're not allowed to.
Exactly right. And I have really enjoyed it. I've gone on to a select committee, so I'm finding my way back into that because they've evolved since I was last on one of those. And for my constituents, while I've always focused on kind of some of the big core issues, I've been able to put my mind into certain more local solutions more. For example, the Orwell Bridge was closed this weekend. I now have got the time to think about whether or not the protocol was properly followed, do some of that scrutiny. But also, I'm still going through that process really of reflecting on that length of time in government and also what the next steps for our party should be. I mean, clearly getting behind the Prime Minister and wanting to win the election, but recognising part of that time being in the cabinet was in the middle of COVID, and that was a real body check to a lot of trying to deliver aspects of the 2019 manifesto.
Do you think the
It's
party's
significantly changed?
Has the party moved too far away from that 2019 manifesto, do you think?
I think it's, by and large, we've tried to deliver lots of that manifesto. But what I would say is that just even the nature of work has changed.
Yeah.
And so some core fundamentals are there, but it is at the same time the undoubtedly the Ukraine war waged by the illegal war waged by Putin again led to a huge issue on energy costs, and so there are just things that you don't necessarily anticipate that come along, and both of those factors have led to significant change, and there's no way that the country or indeed the world trade is in the same place it was prior to COVID hitting the world. So some brilliant things came out of it: innovation, a lot on science, a lot on that sort of element, but also some of the wider challenges, which of course we're still getting through, I would say, but adjusting to that new kind of situation we're in.
Are you thinking about joining the PopCons?
The PopCons. Well, of course, I think Liz is there, Jacob, Ranel, Simon. Yeah. So people, of course, I'm very familiar with.
Your old teammates, your buddies.
I haven't kind of latched on to any particular group yet. As I say, it's. I think it's important that I'm keen. I have spoken a lot. I am supporting. Trying to help the government get through legislation, but also I want to pursue certain issues, frankly, which I was not successful in persuading other departments, and they may be quite small things. They may be small things.
Give us a.
But things about how we improve productivity, and while we've done some stuff on childcare, I think we go further in aspects of deregulation of what we expect of childminders, for example, in terms of education elements. Even a little thing which I will be hopefully pursuing a 10-minute rule bill through. And that is when we're in the European Union. Kate, forgive me. I passed my driving licence before 1997. So that means I can drive a minibus for not-for-profit. I can also drive a van, a bit like a delivery van.
I think I can do those things.
Right. Well,
I can drive some weird vehicles, but yes, sorry.
But the point being that the European rules meant we had to get rid of that.
Right.
And I would like to
Bring it
do a
back.
Brexit bonus. And the benefit of that, and what I always try and do, is try and find a situation. I'm not doing it for the sake of it. But it was community transport in my constituency really struggled to get volunteer drivers. And they end up often paying for people to do a course. It costs £2,000 to £3,000, and then it depends how much return you get on that, or people might move away. And I actually think the driving test is harder than it was before, so that's one element. The other element is, frankly, when we had a bit of an HGV crisis, I'm not criticising HGV drivers, quite a lot of them had switched to doing daily deliveries.
Amazon deliveries, yeah.
Yeah, that sort of other retailers are available, but and yet I could have easily done that sort of driving. And it's those sorts of things which I think are quite straightforward that would unlock productivity in terms of, and give people more choice on some of the careers more straightforwardly. And it's elements like that which may seem very small, but actually could unlock several hundreds, well, millions of people in this country to be able to, one, help their local community, but also in terms of choice of jobs as well, without all that extra bureaucracy. So it's about taking a few things where I really did not persuade my colleagues on all these things, but there's other elements, and I'm the one thing I've promised, Kate, I'm not going to do hand from the grave behaviour.
What's hand from the grave behaviour?
This is well, it happens in a situation where it's normally alive, and when you're getting so long a process and you'd lost out on a point 6 months ago, and then at the last minute you try and pull the whole system down. So I'm not going back into DEFRA or to be critical. I'm not going into DWP to be critical. I'm not going into even health, albeit for a short time, and to try and basically, there are new people in there, and I'll give them my full support in what they're trying to do. But I think there are some fundamentals of things like childcare where we could go a lot further.
Yeah.
There was quite a lot of resistance to some of the deregulation. And by the way, this is children need to be safe wherever they are. But again, we just end up over-bureaucratising the costs, and that's something that I really want to keep pushing on.
Yeah.
So hand from the grave, as I say, is I'm not going to try and pull down the people in their place by, this was all better when I was there or whatever.
You think some people
or try
do
and
do
be
that?
disruptive.
Some people do that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not going to name names, but they definitely do.
Therese Coffey, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kate.